Hey guys, welcome to my Yakamaru Base Tanking guide, a long awaited guide which has taken me a while to do because I've had to learn the role from scratch. Because for some reason whenever I join teams, the base tank is always like one of the first few roles that have been sorted, so I've never actually bothered learning it. But someone commented on one of my previous Yakamaru guides, or was it a Beastmaster guide? I can't remember, asking me to do this. So I learnt it for you guys and hopefully I've done a good job. Let's get right into it. So this is my menu. As always, it's slightly different from the other menus because there's no real 2 or 3 methods. There's only one method, and that's in the method section. As you can see, that space is blank. That's because there's only one method. That's for the whole thing. But for the overview, I'm going to be comparing distance tanking to melee distance tanking, and also the setups. I'm going to be including melee and mage. The reason I'm not including range is because it's extremely similar to mage. But you can obviously take Lunas to cast Heal Other or whatever you want. But yeah, it's very similar to Mage, so I don't want to extend the video any longer than it needs to be. So yeah, and I'll have the method, and finally I'm going to have a comparison between melee distance tanking and distance tanking. What's the advantage, what's the disadvantage? Just a quick comparison there. But yeah, let's kickstart it with melee distance tanking now. What are the objectives? Number 1, stay alive. Number 2, don't die, and number 3, make sure your LP is 1 or above at all times. I think they all mean the same thing. It means don't die. So yeah, that was pretty obvious. That was it. That's it, guys. Guide complete. Pretty easy, eh? No, just kidding, guys. So these are the actual objectives. Obviously you need to tank Yakamaru, so you need to have insight on, and you'll be melee distance. That means you'll be taking magic hits. You need to protect from magic. And make sure Yakamaru's aggression is always on you. If for some reason it goes to one of the DPSs, make sure you provoke it, and make sure you face Yaka away from the DPSs, otherwise they're going to get enraged stacks and they're going to get shreked. And obviously for melee distance tanking you can use any of the 3 combat styles, so there's no real need to use one over the other. And I'll talk about the gear setups in a bit, but this is basically where I like to stand for each pool. If you're melee distance tanking, you need to be aware that when you're melee distance tanking, you want to be in a position to be able to surge into the base pool after the end of each phase without having to tank a ranged hit, which could potentially one-hit you. I'll talk about that in the tactics section again, but these are the optimal positions I like to stand. But it's not really exact. It's not a perfect science by any means, so don't think you have to stand on this exact square. It's just a rough place where you need to stand to make the boss isn't facing onto the DPSs and wrecking them. So yeah, and for distance tanking, it's pretty much the same thing, but you can't use melee, and you're gonna have to tank the ranged hits, not the mage hits. And it's not as risky. You don't need to surge or anything. You'll always get ranged no matter what, because you'll never have to step into melee distance. So it doesn't really matter exactly where you stand. It's not as important to stand in a certain area as it is for melee tanking, but still pretty important that you face away from the DPSs and do all the basic things right. But yeah, let's get into the setups now. Almost forgot, guys, there's some very useful stuff you could be taking with you to Yakamaru to make it a lot easier on yourself. One of them obviously is a Spirit Shield combined with the Penance Aura. If you don't have the Penance Aura, don't take a Spirit Shield, simple as that. Dreadnoughts, of course, very important for Yakamaru, more so than Beastmaster Durzag base tanking. And any of the armor sets, any of the raids armor sets, at least 3 pieces for the set effect, and it could be a mixture of Acto or normal. So any of the 3 armor sets, depending on what style you're using. The spells themselves aren't that important, but if you're the base tank, usually base tanks takes the debuff spells. So usually I take vulnerability and enfeeble. Don't really use ancient curses, or I don't use the ancient spellbook. So the others are a bit irrelevant. But definitely take enfeeble and vulnerability if you're maging, otherwise leave that to someone else from the DPS spell. Alright guys, time for the setup section. I'm going to kickstart it with the melee base tanking setup. Now this is probably the one I've honed the most, because this is the one I've been doing recently, and quite a bit, with varying degrees of success, but I would say this is my favourite and my recommended one. So if you have the Tendril armor, go ahead and use it. You only need three of the 3 raid armor pieces, whether it's acto or not, to get the set effect where your defensives are reset, which is extremely useful as a base. So if you have that, make sure you take it. Otherwise, make sure you take Tetsu or Torva. Actually, Tetsu is probably the best option. Torva is probably not the greatest option. And if you have sort of what do you call it, steadfast gloves? No, steadfast boots and the melee gloves, pneumatic gloves. If you have those, make sure you take them. I prefer the superior Leviathan ring over any other ring because, well, I've got the Sign of Life as backup. Actually, I haven't got it here, but I would take it if I were you. Sign of Life or a Portent of Life, and this can actually reduce the damage quite a bit over the course of the kill. And obviously, Drygors with a shield. Now, I would take any spirit shield, doesn't really matter, but if you have a divine, your accuracy will be much higher than if you use any of the other two. If you do take a spirit shield, which I do recommend, I haven't got it here because I haven't got a divine, I recommend spirit shield. If you take it, then make sure you take penance, otherwise you're going to get absolutely wrecked and you're going to get smited all the time. This is my combination of food that I like to use with the bunyip. The bunyip is really useful because, as you can see, I've got 13k life points here, and over the course of a 15-minute Yakka kill, that can heal you around 15 to 16k HP, the bunyip can, so it heals 2% of your maximum life points every 15 seconds. So my preferred familiar is the bunyip. You really don't need a yak unless you're really desperate and you're not getting any heals whatsoever. So I would, if you do want to take a yak, go ahead, or any of the Beast of Burden, but I wouldn't take it. And obviously the offhand Drygor switch, it's optional, but I like to take it for certain situations where you need to deeps. And obviously the rest is, I guess, self-explanatory. You can fiddle around with the ratios as you wish. The Great Gunkan I like to take because I don't eat that often. And if you eat this, you can't eat another one within 10 seconds, but you don't need to eat that often anyway. And it's the highest healing food in the game, 2.85k HP healed. Scrimshaw Vampirism for healing. You can also take the Vampirism Aura for healing, but I like to take the Brawler Aura so that I could do more deeps. But if you're taking a Spirit Shield, take Penance Aura. And I believe that's about it. The Amulet of Souls is by far the best amulet to take, but you can take the Reaper if you're hardcoring. But the rest of it is pretty good. So this is my setup, and yeah. I've actually fine-tuned this action bar specifically for melee base tanking. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close to it, I'd say. So you want to have Sacrifice first because that heals you. You can use Revolution if you'd like, but I probably wouldn't use it personally. And I've also got this ability now. This particular ability is called Balance Strike, and it's best if you use it when you just start a phase of Yakka. It can heal you quite a bit if you just start one of the phases. Do not use it if your HP is high and Yakka's HP is low. Only use it when your HP is low and Yakka's HP is high. Provoke, obviously, and then these two are specifically for melee distance tanking, so that you can surge towards the pools quite easily without getting hit by the range attack while you're running through. And Destroy is only for when you switch to your offhand Drygor, but the rest of it is pretty good. Obviously have your book open, your defensive book open, or put all your defenses on a secondary action bar. Probably just ignore the secondary. I'm not using this is for various different bosses, but the primary action bar is pretty good for Yakamaru melee base tanking. The second option is Mage base tanking. It doesn't really matter whether you use Mage or ranged or melee, to be honest, but I have never used ranged, but I'm guessing it'll be pretty similar. In fact, it might even be better because you can heal your friends if you're using ranged, using lunar spells, and even if you're using melee. But if you're using Mage, you can be the debuffer, so take debuff runes, vulnerability and enfeeble. This one reduces makes Yakamaru take 10% more damage. This one reduces the damage you take by 10%, so that's really useful as a base tank. The action bar is pretty similar, so you have Sacrifice first and then don't have any stuns. I do have one stun, but I'm just going to make sure I don't use it. And if you want, you can put Escape on your bar as well and Provoke, but I don't really put it. I mean, you can put Escape on your bar so that you can move between pools quickly if you're melee distance tanking. Otherwise, if you're far tanking, it doesn't really matter. And you don't really need that many prayer potions, I found out. But if you're using Torment, then yes, take prayer. The reason I've got a Virtus wand is because I CBA'd by Seismics, But if you have seismics, obviously use them. It'll increase the chance of your spells hitting and your damage and all that stuff. If you do take a seismic wand, it might be worth taking a seismic singularity switch for that extra DPS, but I don't think it's worth it if you're using Virtus, so I haven't taken a Virtus book switch. But the inventory is pretty similar. You're going to take a lot of the runes are going to take up a lot of room, so if you're not confident, feel free to use a yak, but I still prefer the bunyip. And if you're hardcoring it, you can obviously use an ice nihil or a smoke nihil if you're using seismics, so that's pretty nice. And the rest is okay. I mean, 4 super restore flasks maybe a little too, it might not be enough depending on how long the kill lasts and so on, but if you have penance you should be fine. And the Leviathan ring, of course, to reduce the damage randomly, it's very useful for that. And if you don't have Primeval, take Sea Singers or Virtus. I mean, probably wouldn't take Virtus, but definitely take Sea Singers if you have it, or Tectonic, but Sea Singers is probably worth it because Tectonic is kind of a waste, I'd say. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the Mage setup. So you're set to go, you're ready, you know what you're going to be doing, and, well, you don't know what you're going to be doing, but you decided whether or not to melee distance tank or distance tank. First thing you should do is evoke it after you click on the pool to summon it. And let me just go through some of the basics here that you should be aware of throughout the fight. So whenever you see that message, drench or whatever it is, conducts his full water power or whatever, then you need to use freedom. That's simple enough. And basically just rotating through your defensives. Just make sure you don't use 2 defensives together, because then that'll just be wasted. For example, if you're Resonance, don't use Debilitate because that'll half the heal, and if you're Devotion, don't use Reflect because that's pointless. And that's generally what you do as a base tank, really. Put your nip on and start using your defensives, rotate around your defensives, and just wait until the next phase. Now if it's a stun phase, this is probably the easiest phase, so you don't need to be aware of any of the special attacks in this phase because there aren't any. So again, I'll just be talking over what to do basically before I go into the other 3 pools, for which you need to be aware of a few things. This one, all you gotta do is rotate between your defensives. Now prioritize sacrifice if you can in this pool straight after the stun, because straight after the stun, when you sacrifice, you will heal a lot, because just after the stun is when you can do your max DPS. And if you can, use your first ultimate you should be using is Barricade, because when you're using Barricade you can use Soul Split and heal up some HP. Just make sure you don't take off your shield while you Soul Split, and rotate between your defensives. So generally I prioritize Resonance and Devotion over anything else, but then I do use Debilitate sometimes, but it does splash most of the time, and I also use Reflect a lot, but generally speaking I use the barricade the most. Don't forget to use your debuffs if you have them as well, but in this phase usually the base tank is the main stunner, but if you have a Virtus one like me, I generally tell someone else to stun because I'm going to be splashing most of the time. And this phase is fairly simple, as I said. Just make sure your HP is high and you won't have any trouble. Now after the phase is over, it'll go back to the center and it'll be green, of course. When it's green you'll take extra damage, so you got to be very careful when it's green, and it will stop being green when any of the jellies touches it or if the durable is killed. So that's when it stops becoming green, and then you start taking normal damage. Just make sure your HP doesn't drop, and nip up, and just rotate between your defensives. I guess there's nothing much to say, but you just got to be careful, like I said, not to let your HP drop, because it can hit quite hard while it's green. And yeah, that's the phase done. Next up we have the Tendril pull, which is the next pull sequentially because it's clockwise from the stun pull. And here it's Mirage phase, but I just wanted to illustrate a point, so I've tagged it, I evoked it, I did the right thing, and then I devotioned. But the first Tendril, you're never really sure when it's gonna happen, and I didn't have any food here, so basically I died twice within 5 seconds. And here, before I could tag it and invoke it, it attacked the DPS, and the first thing it happened to do was Tendrils. So the DPS, I think 1 DPS died or something. Anyway, yeah, so you should tag it and invoke it as soon as you can in this phase, otherwise you never know, the Tendril could affect the DPS. But generally speaking, save your barricade for when the Tendril's about to spawn. So you know, use your other defenses, but tend not to use barricade until the Tendril spawns. Now that animation there, where his head just bulged, that animation is the cue that in 5 attacks he will do the Tendrils. These 5 attacks could take a long time depending on how many Dreadnoughts there are, but it is 5 attacks. The 5th attack after he did that bulging thing will be the Tendril, and that's when you need to be ready. Now I am ready here, I've got full adrenaline, but I decided to use Immortality, which was a bad option here because I could have saved a lot of HP by using Barricade. But generally speaking, Immortality is a good ability to use if you want 25% damage off, even if you're not going to die within the within those 30 seconds that it's active for. The 25% damage reduction is extremely useful for this phase and for all the other phases, and you can also combine it with the fact that you're going to die, so if the Tendril kills you, it'll just go away and you'll respawn. So it's a really good ability to use here. But I still prefer Barricade for this pull. So yeah, just to summarize, make sure you count 5 attacks after the bulging thing that Yakamaru does. That is when he will do his Tendril attack on you, and he will also, from time to time on this phase, he will also go on a DPS spell, so just make sure you're aware of that and keep working him back. And generally speaking, use Barricade as I said, but if your HP is low, it's probably better to use Immortality, so you heal back more than you had before you used Immortality. So yeah, that's it. Another cool thing you can do throughout all the phases, not just this one, is the fact that you can use dual wield while you're devotioned for that extra bit of damage if you need to. And I also mentioned previously that if you're caded, you can also use Soul Split to heal back some HP, but they're all trivial things, not really necessary. Now here, while I'm moving towards the middle pool, I didn't protect range, and I'm very lucky that I got a heal there to full, because I probably would have died. You see that 4k range hit? That's what can happen when you're traveling between pools, especially when you're going back to the middle pool from a different pool, if you don't protect range and you're melee distance tanking. So yeah, you just need to be aware of that. The best thing I would say is to either Barricade or Resonance while you're walking, so that even if you do get hit and your prayer is off, you can still avoid dying. Sometimes it can hit quite high, as I'll show you later on in that section of the video. But yeah, then again here, I remembered to protect range, and we're on to the Sharknado pool. And essentially you need to make sure that you have Cade ready for this pool, again similar to the Tendril pool, but here it's more obvious when the sharks are going to spawn. So whenever you see the sharks actually spawning, that's when you want to use Cade. Sometimes you may not have Cade ready, and that's fine. All you gotta do is run away as you would if you were a DPS, but make sure you protect range so you don't get one banged. Because outside of melee distance it will hit you with range attacks. In melee distance it always hits you with melee attacks, of course. So yeah, here is a shark, and I have 100% adrenaline thankfully, so I can just Cade it when it spawns. I wouldn't use Immortality here, it's very risky to use Immortality because one of the sharks could kill you, and then another shark could burst in and kill you again. When you didn't have Immortality, it's not like you get one big chunk of damage. So yeah, I wouldn't use Immortality, but otherwise this phase is fairly straightforward. Just make sure you're close-ish to the DPS battle so you can get some heals, because a lot of the DPSs do heal when it's sharks. They Cade and then they heal everyone, so make sure you're close enough to get heals. And you can dual wield, you can do all the things I've been talking about so far, but just remember, when you run away because you don't have Cade, make sure you protect range, otherwise you could die, and then don't come back in until the sharks have burst, and then protect mage again when you come back in. But yeah, that's it. Keep your HP high. And something else you should be aware of is if the poison spawns next to you, and there's no one else taking it, you should probably go and take it. Just be aware of that. Like if you're here and the poison's right next to you, the poison tank may not spot it, so you need to be aware of that. And also surge back into the center pool if you can, to avoid the ranged hit and death. So that's some of the tricks I've learnt over the course of doing Yaka, and on to the final pool now. And last but certainly not least, guys, we have the sand pool. Now, again, it's probably very similar in terms of your approach to it compared to other pools, but here what you need to be aware of is 5 normal attacks after the jelly spawn. So the jelly just spawned there, and then 5 attacks later he will sand, and whenever he sands, obviously he will sand 8 people out of 10 and keep 2 people unsanded that can free the other people. Like for example here, I didn't get sanded, so I went to free my teammates. Now what I should have done is protected range earlier, so that I didn't get hit by that range attack while I was going out of melee distance to free my teammates. And something else you need to be aware of in this phase is really important, I can't stress it enough, is do not trust your immortality to save you. It will get cancelled when you get sanded, and when it gets cancelled, obviously if you die, you will die for real. So do not trust your immortality, at least until the first sand, because when the first sand happens, you're not really sure when it's going to happen. So yeah, just use nips here to delay the sand as much as possible. So there goes the jelly, you can see it just spawned, and 5 normal attacks later is when he will do his sand attack and cancel all your current defensive abilities that are active except rejuvenate. Now that is why rejuvenate is so good. You cannot overestimate the value of Raid's armor here, because it will reset your reset, if you know what I mean. So here I just got sanded, so all my defenses got reset. A good ability to use is preparation here, so your resonance recharges more quickly, but rejuvenate doesn't get reset, so you can use rejuvenate while you're sanded, which is a good idea actually, and your resonance will come back fairly quickly if you use preparation, and you can use that again. Now rejuvenate is really good because if you have rage gear, it gets reset and you can constantly heal 40% of your life points. Enhanced Excalibur doesn't get reset, you still can only use it every 5 minutes, but rejuvenate does get reset by Raid's armor, so it's actually quite useful in this situation. And again, if it's close to sanding your teammates when it's about to die, make sure you remind your teammates to get off, otherwise you could get sanded and you'll have to do the phase again. And last but not least, we have Mirage phase, where everything happens at once, of course. So at 50k you need to be ready to move to Tendril's pool, Vokit, and this is a bit of a clutch Mirage phase, which is kind of useful because then you know how to perform under pressure. Here I have almost no food left, but then all I need to do is sort of distance tank. I don't want to risk going MD, and spam the pool, get MD when it's about to die, and spam the pool. You may be asked to take 10 planks or 5 planks or whatever, in which case you need to remember that you need to be MD at the end of Sharknado pool, so just go around clockwise around the pool starting at Tendril pool. And if you do want to go MD, remember to protect Mage. If you want to go MD early before it dies, remember to protect Mage, otherwise protect range. Just follow the basic stuff really, and you should be fine. There's nothing much more to say. The stun pool is usually closed by stun closers, so you don't have to worry about that. But generally speaking, yeah, that's it. You don't really need to worry about too many things. It gets done pretty quickly. If you fail it, you fail it. Can't really do much, but just remember as you go around the pools, Voke Yakamaru onto you as soon as possible, and if you do decide to go MD, protect Mage, and vice versa. When I started out, I used to have some very good reasons for why I shouldn't use melee distance base tanking. One of them is this: I forgot to use protect from range while going between the Tendril pool and the middle pool, and I just got dropped in one go. So yeah, if you forget, that can be quite annoying, and you can obviously resonance to rectify that problem. And here I was actually too eager. I did protect range, but I mistimed my run to the middle, so I should have timed it so I ran just after it did a normal attack, but I did it in between, and yeah, I had the wrong prayer and I got dropped again. But then you do feel quite good if you manage to figure out the way, the common sense way of surging to get to the pool before Yakamaru spawns, so that you don't have that problem. If you do figure it out, well, it's not that hard, it's just common sense. You need to position yourself so you can surge, and also meleeing it is quite good, because as you can see, that was balance strike. If I used it when I was really low HP and Yakko was really high HP, that would have healed me a lot more. So that's quite fun. But sometimes you just gotta say, I give up. I throw your hands up and say, my team failed and I couldn't do anything about it. And that is literally everything I know about Yakamaru Base Tanking. And if I forgot anything, or you think I've misinterpreted something, feel free to let me know in the comments below. I'll be happy to help. I'd like to thank Zaratus for some epic base tanking tips. He is the master of Yakamaru Base Tanking, so thank you for your tips, mate. Really helped me out. And here are some of my final tips to make a successful Yakamaru base tank. So number 1, Voke, pretty obvious and have insight on. Freedom your drenches as soon as possible, that will save you a lot of pain. Nip up if you do have them, and debuff every single pool. So you need to remember to redo your debuffs after they run out after 1 minute and at the start of every single pool. And you need to prioritize avoiding damage over healing. That means do not use rejuvenate too many times, because the amount of HP it heals is less than the amount of HP that you can save by using something like a devotion or a reflect or a barricade. And even resonance can heal quite a bit as well if you're on a high enrage level. So be aware of that and prioritize that. But rejuvenate is obviously excellent for healing if you don't have much food left, and all these can be reset with Raids armor. So if you wear Raids armor, you're going to find it a lot easier. Be aware of what happens and when Tendril and Sand happens. Remember what I said, the 5 attacks thing. If you want to remind yourself, go back to the relevant section of the video. And finally, be careful when you're going between pools if you're melee distance tanking. So yeah, that's a big thing. It doesn't really matter whether you melee distance tank or far tank as far as damage is concerned, but it's probably easier to far tank. But if you're melee distance tanking, just remember to be careful. And that is it for this video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed. Please feel free to check out some of our other guides that we've made, I've made in this channel about Yakamaru and Beastmaster Durzag. Hope it helps you out, and I will see you next time.